Hello and welcome to Trails Worth Hiking, the show that brings you some of the most interesting backpacking and trekking routes in the world. I'm your host, Jeremy Pendry. In the first part of the show, we bring you the story and history of a trail. Then we tell you what it's like to hike the trail and how you can do it. On this episode, we're going to be doing a multi-day loop hike through stunning alpine landscapes, staying in huts with fellow travelers, where we might see really large parrots. Wait, what? Parrots? Yes, we are heading to the wild world of the Lord of the Rings as we hike the Kepler Track in Fiordland National Park on the beautiful South Island of New Zealand. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm excited to start the show by announcing the first ever Trails Worth Hiking backpacking meetup. We are going to be going backpacking in Point Reyes National Seashore in Northern California. Join me. I will be there along with good friend of the show, Tony Wong. We will be camping at Wildcat Camp, which is a really beautiful spot overlooking the ocean, very close to the beach. The event will be on March 22nd through March 23rd. So we have a group campsite for the night of March 22nd. This is a great trip for anyone to enjoy. In addition to those who are experienced backpackers, this could also be a really good trip for beginning backpackers. So if you're a listener who is really into trekking more than backpacking, in other words, you're into hostel to hostel or hut to hut hikes, and not yet someone who has tried doing backpacking trips with your own tent, this is a great opportunity. It's only a 6-mile hike. It's fairly gentle terrain. The campsites at Point Reyes have pretty good amenities. They have pit toilets, a water faucet, there's picnic tables. So it feels like you're car camping to some extent, though you're still 6 miles from the trailhead. But it does give you that feel of having the amenities you might have in a regular car camping site. As I said, we'll be camped right next to a beautiful beach. And if we take a short hike down the beach, we reach Alamere Falls, which is a beautiful waterfall that comes over a cliff onto the beach. There is a limit on the group site of a maximum of 25 people. So please reach out to me as soon as possible through our email address, trailsworthhiking@gmail.com, or through the Instagram account at trailsworthhiking podcast if you send me a direct message there. And let me know if you would like to come, and if so, how many people you plan to bring. There's no charge for the campsite. That's on me. That's on the show. Plus, if you're coming from a long distance, so for example, if you're thinking, well, maybe it's too far to go for one night in Northern California if you live in Oregon or if you live in LA or somewhere that's a decent drive from the Bay Area, what you can do is you can come Friday if you let me know, because I've also reserved a car camping site at nearby Samuel P. Taylor State Park. There's a group site there. That site only holds up to 10 people, so if you're coming from a distance, let me know as soon as possible so that I can hold a spot for you for Friday night the 21st. I will also be there Friday night the 21st. I think Tony will be there then as well. So if you're coming from a distance, that might make the trip worth it to extend it to a 2-night trip. And of course, you're on your own after that. You could make this a bigger trip if you'd like. So let's hang out. Email me at trailsworthhiking@gmail.com, as I mentioned, if you're interested, or DM me through the Instagram account. I realize that many of you don't live close enough to Northern California to come. You may live in another part of the country or another part of the world. So let me say this. This is just the beginning. I would love to get out to where more of you live and hike anywhere in the world that you are. So reach out to me if you want to organize a backpacking trip or trek where I could join you. If we can get even a small group together, that would be great. This is part of my New Year's resolution to take the show from the virtual world to the real world. So let's go hiking on March 22nd and 23rd in Point Reyes National Seashore. It's a beautiful, beautiful location and a really great place for a good group to hang out. And I've already paid for the site, so don't let me waste my money here. Let me know if you'd like to join me. That brings me to Outdoor Herbivore, our sponsor, which makes great backpacking meals. If you decide to come, why not bring an Outdoor Herbivore vegan or vegetarian backpacking meal? But as I always say, you don't need to be vegan or vegetarian to enjoy these meals. The meals are made with quality ingredients, they're in boil in a bag packaging, and they have lots of calories for a hungry hiker. There may be, I'm not positive on this yet, but there may be some giveaways at the backpacking meetup in March of Outdoor Herbivore gift cards. We'll see. That's something I'm working on. Thanks as always to our sponsor, Outdoor Herbivore. All right, a couple of notes before we jump into the episode. If you're looking for a beautiful outdoor-themed 2025 calendar, check out christianpaulphotography.com. Christian is a former guest on the show. He was our guest on the Uinta Highline Trail episode. He is a professional photographer, and every year he puts out a fantastic monthly calendar that's great to pin up so that you have some cool outdoor photos for the year. So check out christianpaulphotography.com. Thanks to Christian for sending me a copy of his 2025 calendar, which is really beautiful with some amazing shots. One other thing I want to mention is that in episode 35, we covered the Kaiserkrone, which is a really neat trail in the Alps of Europe, in Austria. Our guest on that episode, Alex Schumann, had walked us through his trip on the Kaiserkrone. And one of the things that he had mentioned, I believe, is that he relied pretty heavily on a really good article by Moon and Honey Travel, which is a great blog, particularly for hikes in the Alps. I just wanted to mention that I linked the article for Moon and Honey Travel in the show notes on episode 35 if anyone's interested in checking out that Kaiserkrone episode and wants to read the article that has some pretty good detail on how to do that hike. And Sabrina of Moon and Honey Travel was also a guest on episode 10, where we covered the Rota Vicentina Fisherman's Trail in Portugal. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone had easy access to her article if they want another good resource for the Kaiserkrone. So I've added it to the episode 35 show notes. All right, with those housekeeping notes out of the way, let's get into this episode. Our guest on the show is listener JD Yingling. JD is a longtime educator, recently retired. And for this episode, we're going to hear about how he took a group of students on this amazing trek in New Zealand. I haven't been to New Zealand yet, but from everything I've heard and seen, I know I need to go. The Southern Alps look pretty amazing. We've all seen them in Lord of the Rings. But putting aside the fantasy world, they look pretty incredible in the real world. So I do hope to get there. And there are so many good, great walks, as they call them, in New Zealand to cover on the show, and I hope we will eventually get to a number of them. We have to start somewhere, so we are going to start with the Kepler Track. But because it's our first time in New Zealand, let's talk a little bit about the country and its history. New Zealand is an island nation in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. It has two main islands, the North Island and the South Island. The Kepler Track is on the South Island, so we'll mostly focus there. People first arrived in New Zealand around 1300 AD, or maybe a little earlier than that. But think about that. That's pretty late in the grand scheme of things. Even Iceland had already been inhabited for hundreds of years the first time any people lived in New Zealand. This was the last major habitable landmass on Earth to be inhabited. And so habitable, of course, would exclude places like Antarctica. But of all the places where people can reasonably live, this was the last of them to be inhabited. The first inhabitants were Polynesians who arrived by sea. And as you can probably imagine or may know, this is a very different history than that of neighboring Australia, which has been inhabited by people for more than 50,000 years, and maybe even as far back as 65,000 years. So that gives you an idea of just how untouched by people New Zealand has been in the past. The first people to reach New Zealand, the Polynesians, are now called the Maori. Before Europeans arrived, there were a number of distinct groups of Maori throughout the islands, but there wasn't a need for a common name at that time, so there wasn't one. But once there were Europeans, they had to have a word to distinguish Maori from the Europeans. Maori comes from the phrase Maori Tangata, which means ordinary man, or essentially a regular person in the place where they live. So the word Maori was a word that came into use in the 19th century as a way to distinguish the indigenous people or the first people of New Zealand from Europeans. European contact started with Dutch explorer Abel Tasman. He was sailing for the Dutch East India Company. He encountered Tasmania, which later bore his name. A footnote to that, he didn't name it that himself. He called it something else, but others gave it his name. He first sighted New Zealand's South Island in December 1642. At the time, Tasman didn't know it was an island. He speculated that it might be an extension of a great southern continent, which had been long speculated to exist, though we know now that it doesn't. Tasman's ship anchored offshore, and eventually there was an encounter with a canoe of Maori. This resulted in 4 of Tasman's men being clubbed to death and one of the Maori being shot. So not a great first encounter. Later, more canoes came their way, and Tasman eventually left, never having actually set foot on New Zealand. And amazingly, then the Maoris lived for more than another century without seeing another European. It seems pretty remarkable to me. By the way, the name New Zealand was given to it later by Dutch cartographers who thought it resembled the Dutch province of Zeeland near modern Antwerp. All right, so we've got this huge period of time where there are no Europeans after Tasman's brush up against New Zealand. The next encounter with Europeans is 1769, when English Captain James Cook arrived on the first of his 3 famous voyages. He and his crew did actually land on New Zealand. I won't go into the details, but there was violence there too, and some Maori were killed in contact with Cook and his crew. Unlike Tasman, Cook circumnavigated New Zealand and figured out that it was 2 islands and not a continent. Though, what is a continent really? Just a really big island, right? So I guess it's all a matter of perspective. So going forward, there was a treaty with the Maori in 1840. It became a British crown colony in 1841. It became a, quote, dominion of Britain in 1907, which meant that it had more self-government than before. And it had full statutory independence in 1947, though it still retained the British crown as its head of state. And it was part of the founding members of the British Commonwealth in 1949. Apparently, there's still some debate about when New Zealand actually became independent, but take your pick among these dates. Today, New Zealand has about 5.25 million people, and the Maori are its largest minority. There are other minorities from immigration from Asia and other Pacific Island nations. So now let's focus on the South Island of New Zealand, where the Kepler Track is. The South Island is also called Te Waiponamu, and please forgive my pronunciation of Maori. I'm going to do the best I can. The South Island is the biggest island in size, but it only has 1/4 of New Zealand's population. Though the North Island today has a higher population by a lot than the South Island, this wasn't always the case. Back in the 1860s, there was a gold rush on the South Island, and it, at the time, actually had a bigger population until well into the 20th century than the North Island. Before Europeans, the South Island was very sparsely populated by several different indigenous groups, and there were changes that happened even among those groups over time as they were absorbed by each other through migration and marriage and other societal changes. But the bottom line is it wasn't that heavily populated until Europeans arrived. And today, although there's over 1 million people there, it's still more sparsely populated by a lot than the North Island. The Kepler Track is in the Southern Alps. This is a mountain range that runs north-south on the South Island. It has New Zealand's highest peak, Aoraki, also known as Mount Cook, which is 3,724 meters high and 12,218 feet high. The Southern Alps were named by Cook because of their grand height. They were formed and reached such a great height due to plate tectonics. New Zealand is one of those countries that's kind of on the edge of the ring of fire where there are multiple plates colliding and lots of tectonic activity that forms mountain ranges. Within the Southern Alps, the hike is in Fiordland National Park. Fiordland is New Zealand's largest national park. It's in the southwest corner of New Zealand. As the name suggests, there are many fjords there. They're really deep and long fjords, the most well-known of which is Milford Sound. There's also a number of really impressive lakes. The lake where this hike is called Teanau. You'll hear about that lake more in my conversation with JD Yingling. This area has a dense forest of beech and a kind of family of trees called podocarps. There's ferns, there's mosses. There's also the kea, which is the world's only alpine parrot. This is a large parrot endemic to the Southern Alps of New Zealand. It's typically about 19 inches long or 48 centimeters. It's olive green with a bright orange under its wings that you can see when it flies. This is a really smart bird. And yes, they want your food, so you have to be careful when you're out there not to leave backpacks unattended. They're a very social bird as well. They're protected today, but many are still killed by humans, mostly because they can cause problems due to their intelligence, strength, and curiosity. In the past, there were also debates about whether they were a threat to livestock, but I think that's been somewhat debunked, though maybe they, potentially could prey on weakened or injured livestock. It's not clear. So Fiordland is part of the Te Waiponamu UNESCO World Heritage Site, which was established in 1990. This is a group of a few national parks in this part of New Zealand that together make up the World Heritage Site. There are hundreds of glaciers in the site. There's lots of endemic alpine flora, lots of birds. In addition to the kea, there's the kiwi, the parakeet, Fiordland penguin, the New Zealand falcon, and the brown teal, to name a few. There's also the very rare Takahe flightless swamp hen. And this UNESCO World Heritage Site, it's also supposed to be one of the best examples of the biota of Gondwanaland, which is a former southern supercontinent that existed for hundreds of millions of years until about 50 million years ago, when plate movements caused it to drift apart. But apparently, because I guess New Zealand was around so long without people, a lot of the biota of that former supercontinent still exists in New Zealand. All right, so the Kepler Track is one of the Great Walks of New Zealand. The Great Walks are a set of tramping tracks, which is their phrase for hiking trails, developed and maintained by New Zealand's Department of Conservation. They're considered to be the best of New Zealand's tramping tracks. This group of hikes was established in 1992 to promote them, but also to maintain them. As you'll hear in the conversation with JD, there's a Great Walk season through the summer portion of New Zealand's weather. The Kepler Track itself is named after Kepler Mountain, which the track traverses. And Kepler Mountain, as you can probably guess, is named after Johannes Kepler, who was the German astronomer whose 3 laws of planetary motion are the basis of modern astronomy and essentially help put the sun at the center of the solar system in our understanding, rather than the Earth, as had been previously thought. In 1984, in preparation for the 1988 centennial of New Zealand's national parks, they were looking for projects to celebrate the centennial, and 2 members of Fiordland National Park's board, Alf Excel and Les Henderson, came up with the Kepler Track route, which required some new trail to be built, but also joined 2 existing routes. The track did open for the centennial in 1988 and has been open since then. I mentioned Lord of the Rings in the intro, and as many of you know, Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies were filmed throughout New Zealand. But there is one part of the Lord of the Rings that is filmed along the Kepler Track, and that is on Kepler Mire, which is a very marshy part of the track. This was the dead marshes in the Two Towers movie, where Gollum led Frodo and Sam through the marshes. In the movie, there were dead faces in the water. It was a sort of ghostly graveyard for men, elves, and dwarves who had fought in the area in a past battle. You can actually walk on boardwalks on this trail that go by Kepler Mire and see one of the places where Lord of the Rings was filmed. And if you're in New Zealand, you could see lots of other places where it was filmed as well, but this one is directly on the Kepler Track. Not directly on the track, but very close by is Mavora Lakes Park, and that was used for the lake where, after Boromir was killed in the movies, his body was floated down a river and into a lake. And so that's in Mavora Lakes Park, nearby the Kepler Track. Also filmed in Mavora Lakes Park was a scene in the Fangorn Forest where Merry and Pippin escaped some orcs. So you have several Lord of the Rings film sites right there in the area where the Kepler Track is. With that intro, let's leave Lord of the Rings behind and head to the Kepler Track. And let's listen to my conversation with JD Yingling about his hike with a group of students on the Kepler Track. JD Yingling, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here with you, Jeremy. It's I've enjoyed listening to your podcast in the past, and so got good tips on doing the Zion Traverse earlier and last year, and enjoyed that. And so yeah, I really enjoyed the podcast.
Thank you. And I'm glad you were actually able to go out and do one of the trips. I mean, that's the whole point of the show, right? So it's great for me to hear that people are actually doing them. You are not just doing backpacking and trekking, though. You're also sort of in a new phase in life and living outdoors a little bit. So, talk about where you are and where you've been since you recently retired.
Okay, so retired after about a 40-year career in education, last 26 years teaching in college, and in May finally retired, and so we got a volunteer gig at the north rim of the Grand Canyon with the National Park Service, working as a volunteer interp ranger. My wife and I both did. And so we've been at the North Rim for the past 5 months. Started first part of May and just got finished about October 19th. We left up at the North Rim. So yeah, it was a wonderful summer. That's the best weather that you could ever find. It's just beautiful up there. It would get to about 80, and we think, man, it's really going to be hot today. And and I think we turned on the heater every morning. So from being from Arkansas, used to hot summers, this was ideal. Beautiful weather, beautiful scenery. Of course, you just love the Grand Canyon, so that was great to meet people from all over the world coming in to visit.
So, one of the things that's interesting about you, as well as with respect to your outdoor pursuits, is that you got into backpacking later in life with your wife. Talk a little bit about how that came about and what it's been like since you've been doing more of it.
Okay, so I really, when I was in college, I wanted to do backpacking things. I went so far as to buy an old external frame Kelty backpack. You know, I still have that, and I had the mummy sleeping bag, all the gear that I needed, and I think I went out for one night. I just didn't know what to do or how to do it, and so I had the desire to do that, but didn't. And then got into my career coaching and put that on the back burner for a long time. And then as our children got older, they started going to something called Wilderness Trek out in Colorado. It's in Salida, Colorado, and they would go with our church group out there. And so my wife actually went with my oldest son first, and they backpacked and summited a mountain there, and it was about a 4 or 5 day backpacking trip, and they do everything to make it as hard as they can on you. So they you carry canned goods and heavy stuff, and so a few years later, when my youngest son was going, I went with him with three of my good guy friends, and so we did the trip, and it was miserable. I mean, it was just carrying so much weight. We must have been carrying 50 pounds or so, and just had poor equipment, but it was a good experience overall, being out in the wilderness, and getting that feel of you got everything you need on your back, to survive. And so really love that part of it. But I came off that mountain that trip and decided there's got to be a better way. And so I started researching more and started listening to podcasts and things like that to find out more about backpacking. And Kim and my wife and I started driving the bus out for the trip. And so we would drop the kids off to do their wilderness trek thing. And then we would go explore, we'd go climb Mount Princeton or Elbert or something like that and backpack around that area. Just love that BV and Salida area, and have one of my former swimmers who lives there with her family. And so we have gone out there every summer to backpack. And so anyway, so that's how we started kind of getting into backpacking.
So let me note a couple of things there. And this is something I said before on the show. You said you started out by telling me about a miserable backpacking trip
That's right.
and then said, but And then you talked about how it made you inspired to want to learn more and do more. That's the thing that I think a lot of us go through at the outset with this activity and with this hobby. All the other people you hear who just would have said it's miserable and then don't say the but part, they're not still
Right.
backpacking.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Some of us saw that value in it and really said, okay, it was miserable, but I'm going to make this something I really enjoy.
That's right. So I always tell people that you learn more between your first backpacking trip and your second one than you do any other time. It's just that learning
Yeah,
curve is
yeah.
so great. And then you start learning more from other people and other backpackers. And I've taught backpacking to my students. I started teaching in backpacking and camping class for my students. The last few years I was teaching, and I would tell them that at my age I have more money than I have energy, and so I
Okay.
invest in good lightweight gear. And
Yes,
so that's kind of
exactly.
been our philosophy over the past. I guess we've been backpacking seriously for about the past 7 years.
Okay. So now tell me how you end up in New Zealand and end up doing a trip there and working with kids again.
We started bringing college groups out to Tuba City on on the reservation in Arizona, and and then we introduced some of them to hiking and backpacking in the Grand Canyon. So kind of got that idea and reputation on campus. And so we were supposed to go to New Zealand in 2020. Of course, that was right in the middle of COVID. So our trip got canceled and actually got pushed back 2 years. The director in New Zealand, her name is Pam Little. And Pam has been doing this for 27, 28 years or something like that. Just great. Loves the students, and the students love her. And she's always looking for good things for them to do. And she knew we loved to backpack, and she sent me this information about the Kepler Track. And she said, "Hey, check this out. We've had students go in the past, but thought this might be something you'd want to take students to." So I looked at it; it looked awesome, and so I was like, "Yeah, we want to do that." And so we had that. As we were going to New Zealand for this trip, we spent a couple weeks in Australia, and then about 7 weeks in New Zealand, and then finished up the semester in Thailand. So we were at Queenstown for the biggest part of that time in New Zealand, and had this in the back of our mind that we are going to do this trip. So once we got to Queenstown, we started researching and getting ready and prepared to do the backpacking trip.
And Queenstown is actually kind of a hub for this kind of activity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Queenstown is incredible. It's surrounded by snow-covered mountains. It's got this huge lake and just so scenic. We had our classroom that overlooked the lake and also overlooked one of the mountains. And so every day we would see these paragliders floating off the mountain, and really distracting to try to teach when you're looking outside at all these things. They had jet boats going by, and it was incredible with all the things they have. So yeah, it's kind of the adventure sports hub in probably the southern hemisphere. I know Patagonia is big, but as far as that area, I think they're known for getting bungee jumping popularized. That's where it kind of originated, and so there was whitewater rafting, skiing, snowboarding, just about anything, canyoneering, just about anything you want to do, they had it available to do. And so my wife and I did parachuting for the first time there from 15,000 feet out of a
Wow.
plane. So that was that was interesting, but beautiful and a great experience. But so all those things are there, just right in Queenstown. So it's a hub of adventure sports.
Tell me about the Great Walk season in New Zealand.
Great Walk season is very unique to New Zealand, and it's an incredible event that goes on every spring over there, spring, summer for them. They have this setup where they'll have the whole nation is encouraged to get outside and hike and get on they call it tramping. So they
Hmm.
tramp on the tracks instead of hiking on the trails like we do here. And so it's the tramping season. For us, it started in late October and went to the end of March, I believe, maybe into April. So during this time, you'll have families that have gone back to the same track to hike as a family or to tramp as a family every year. And so it's a great way to pass down family heritage and the appreciation for the beauty of their country, which is just incredible. It's a stunningly beautiful place. I was so impressed with this great walk season. As someone who taught wellness for 26 years to college students, I would love to see us in the United States have something similar to that. To have everybody get outside for a season and explore and just get out in nature. It do so much for our physical health and mental health and emotional well-being. So, yeah, I would love to see it happen. But so it's really a unique thing that they have in New Zealand that I can't say enough about. That it's such a positive for their country.
So what did you do to figure out how to do the Kepler track? You hear about this thing and it's, you're in a country that you're not that familiar with, but now you're there and you're going to take these kids on this hike. How do you go about planning it?
Yeah, well, the good thing is they speak English. And I don't speak English well. So anyway, it was good that it's good that there was I didn't have a language barrier there. So all the printed information was in English, and so they have just a lot of information that they have for their tracks, and so they've got tracks all over the country, North Island, South Island, and we were on the South Island here in Queenstown, and just all kinds of beautiful tracks, and they're well marked. So we went on a lot of tramps around Queenstown. And we did that just preparing for our trip. We went up mountains, went along the lake for long hikes, and so we had a lot of hikes there, and very well marked. The trails are well taken care of, and so it's a great place to hike. So there, right down from our apartment and where we had our classes, there was a conservation visitor center there in Queenstown, and this Department of Conservation sets up all the tracks and all the recreational opportunities they have in the nation of New Zealand. And so that visitor center had excellent resources. They had maps, they had brochures, they had websites you could connect to, and the employees were super helpful. They were just there to try to help you have a good experience. So we pretty much just got their materials, the maps and everything. And, some of the hard part was trying to figure out where to hire gear, or to rent gear, and there was a lot of outdoor shops in Queenstown. So Kim and I just went to like every one just to see what they had available. And some of them might have, utensils to eat with, and others will have freeze dried meals, and others will have backpacks. And so we kind of collected all that information, made a spreadsheet for all the students to see where they could get what, and then see what they needed. And so that's kind of how we did the logistics to try to figure out how to get all the gear we had.
That's really helpful. I was going to ask you about that because when you travel internationally, a lot of times you're doing a lot of things or seeing multiple areas or countries, and you don't want to take a bunch of backpacking gear with you.
Right.
But if you show up in a place that has great backpacking, you still want to go do it. And so that's great to hear that they have enough shops there where you can rent things. Kathmandu, for example, in Nepal is like that as well. There's tons of shops where you can rent all the gear you'd ever need. And so that's great to hear that Queenstown has that kind of infrastructure as well.
Yeah, Small Planet was the one outfitter that seemed to have everything, and so that was the one I would go to if I was going back to Queenstown. I would go directly to them. They were just getting their backpacking gear out. It was kind of been stored all winter. They're switching from skiing to backpacking, and so but they were super helpful and just went in and told them what we were trying to do, and they fitted our students for backpacks. We got some trekking poles for Kim and I, and we got sleeping bags and that sort of thing. So they were super helpful.
So talk about, you were just mentioning how they were just switching from winter gear to summer gear. The Great Walk season starts, I guess, around October. And one of the things that I noticed is that the cost of this trip can be much higher once you get into the Great Walk season. And you guys are sort of skirting the border of the season. Talk about how much this trip costs to do and how that works and the sort of hack that you guys did to make it a little bit less expensive.
Yeah, so the Great Walk season, the prices jump from about $25 a night to $120 a night.
Uh-huh.
And so it's a big increase. And so we got the last weekend before the Great Walk season started. And so that was awesome for us because we were trying to get in, and we were watching the snow to make sure the weather was right because there had been a lot of snow on the Kepler track until right about 2 weeks before we were planning on going, and so the snow kind of slacked off and started melting some on the mountain. So that was good. So we were like, I think maybe 4 days before Great Walk season started is when we started our trek.
So if the weather cooperates, that sounds like a perfect way to do it for somebody who's on a budget.
That's right. Yeah, that is the way to do it. Right at those edge seasons, at the beginning or end of Great Walk is a great time to do it because it's a lot cheaper. You don't have as many amenities. You're not gonna have somebody building a fire for you, and I think they have fuel there and things like that in the huts. But other than that, it's worth the worth not having to pay the extra. I think to do those things.
Well, it sounds like you do need backpacking gear in the sense that you need sleeping bags and you need to be able to cook your food and bring your food, but there are huts. Can you talk about
Yes.
what the huts are like and how the hut to hut system works on this track?
The huts are, we would call them lodges. They are huge. They sleep, I think they're anywhere from 48 to 70 people in there in the huts. And so if you could imagine a lodge with a big community room that has sinks and counter space for cooking, they have tables that you can set up to eat or play cards or games or whatever on and just hang out. The Luxmore hut's the one I remember the best because you have these windows overlooking these alpine lakes and the mountains that are snow covered outside, and it was just beautiful. It was cold in there when we were there, but it was doable. And so we all hung out in the community room, cooked our food, and talked to people from all over the world that were there, also tramping the Kepler. And the bunk rooms are different from what Americans would think. I think that's a learning curve for Americans to understand how to do these huts because you really just have double bunk beds that are just in a big room. And
Hmm.
so, our students, American students, internationally traveling, most of them a lot for the first time, they're not used to the difference in modesty that you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
overseas that we have. And of course, backpacking camping community is a little bit different in modesty as well, but
right.
so them kind of understanding that people are going to change clothes right there on their bunk and not think anything about it, so that they got used to that and embraced that, and it wasn't stunning them much after the initial exposure. You had a sleeping pad on the bunks, and then so you just needed a sleeping bag. So we were able to eliminate tents and sleeping pads and things like that for extra weight that we had to take. And there were flush toilets in the Luxmore. The others had vault toilets outside. The hut experience was very unique. I haven't experienced that before. I've read about that and sort of kind of was prepared what to expect. But as far as huts go, I was thinking of little little huts where maybe 8 people could sleep, and
Right.
very rustic. And oh, it was not like that. It was like a 5 bedroom house, that size thing that we're staying in, with windows and deck space and picnic tables outside. It's just a really kind of for a backpacker a luxurious way to stay and go from place to place.
I find the most important piece of gear in a hut to hut hike is earplugs.
Yes, I don't think I took earplugs, but I don't remember. I think maybe we were so tired by the time we got there, it didn't matter. But yeah, that would be helpful because so many people were in there, and I'm sure you have snores. I was probably one of the snorers, so I couldn't hear anybody else. But yeah, so that was interesting. And so getting to those huts early to get your bunk space set up and that sort of thing, I guess would be the advice that you have to if you're going to do the hut to hut. That's the one thing that you want to think about if you have a big group.
Do these huts have kitchens or do you bring your own stoves and fuel still?
We brought our own stove and fuel. I think that's one of the things that they do in the Great Walk season, that they provide the fuel for you and
Okay.
cooking areas. But they all had sinks and running water. They did recommend that we filter the water, so maybe that's
Okay.
another thing with the Great Walk, that they filter the water or they purify it or something like that. But we did take water filters with us and filter the tap water there.
So you mentioned that the signage is pretty good. I think that following the trail is pretty easy. But and you also mentioned that you had a map. Is there for navigation? What was the setup that you would recommend? Just bring this map and then follow what you see in front of you.
Yeah, it's so easy with the markings on the trail and with the maps that I think that's the easiest way to go. I had all trails downloaded with the route, but I don't think I ever used it. It was so straightforward on where to go and well marked. That all the huts and all the stops were marked, and even the side trails up to the Luxmore Peak was marked well, and Luxmore Cave outside there was marked, and so yeah, everything was marked really well. The signage was great.
How do you get to where the trail starts from Queenstown?
We had a private company that was providing transportation for us throughout the time we were there, and so they were able to get a driver to pick us up. And there were 13 of us in the group, so we just divided up to pay for that private passage over there. They do have bus service from Queenstown that you can go. So that was available too. Looked into that a little bit, but we decided the private shuttle would work best for us, and it turned out we left the trail a night early, so we finished the trail earlier than we had planned, and so we were able to call our driver that day and say, hey, pick us up at 5:30 at the bridge. And it worked out because the students were ready to get back and have a day off before classes started the next day. So that's what we did with that.
So where do you take the bus to if you're taking the bus? Is it Te Anau? How do you pronounce that?
Tayanu, that's what
Te Anu. Okay, Te
that's
Anu.
what I call it, Tayanu. So
That's the Arkansas version of it.
that's the Arkansas version of it. So we'll see
Okay.
what we may have a New Zealander that will correct us.
Yes,
But
we're probably both wrong.
that's how Tayanu. Tayanu is yeah, that's the jumping off point. And
Okay.
there's two ways that you can get there. You can take a bus out to the trailhead. They actually have a shuttle that goes out to different sites on the trailhead where we started and then where we finished the hike. They have bus service, but they also have a ferry that goes across. It's about a 3 mile ride across the lake. After we did it, I thought that's probably the best way to go because you could easily go stay in Tayanu and walk to the ferry and get on that, and it drop you off right on the trail.
Okay.
That would be a easy way to go. And I think our students the following year, I've recommended that they do that, and that's what they did.
Okay. So where are you starting on the trail then? So you're going to Te Anu, then you can get to this ferry. What's the lake that you're crossing?
I can't even remember the name of the lake there. It's right. It may be Tayanu Lake. I can't remember.
Okay. This is Fiordland National Park. Is that where the
Yes,
hike is? Okay.
right in that area. We were dropped off at the Kepler Track, Shelter, and Car Park.
Okay.
That was the title of it, and so it looked like the starting point of the track because we had signage there, and it was obviously the place where most people seem to start that.
So this is a loop trek. Which way did you hike it
We hiked it clockwise.
and why?
We were looking at the maps, and this would allow us to get the most elevation gain early. And so, the first day, we had most of our climb that we did, and then we would get up on the mountains and then hike the ridge the second day. And so that's kind of what we were looking for. And I think that was the recommended route from the travel guides or the
Hmm.
the people I talked to in the Department
Okay.
of Interior. Yeah.
Okay. Now we talked about the price of the permits, but that includes the huts and the admission fee to the park and all of that?
Yes.
Okay.
That was all included in that.
And how do you do that? You go online and book the whole thing online?
You can book online, or we were able to go directly to the tourism office and purchase the permits, and so we all had the permits from that. So either way would work. Their online site is very well organized, easy to navigate. I looked at some research. I did some research on that before we were talking, and it looked like a real easy way to go.
All right. So we've talked about this area of having snow-capped mountains and being beautiful. And I know the South Island is sort of where a lot of the really great backpacking in New Zealand is, but talk a little bit about what this Kepler Track region looks like.
It is, I mean, it's a beautiful area. It's, you travel through there. Of course, there are sheep pastures everywhere. There's so many sheep, and it was lambing season. And so you would see these lambs just frolicking around the fields. It was so much fun to drive through the countryside and just see all the sheep there and very green, lush country. They're known for the ferns, and everywhere there was forested area, you'd see ferns everywhere. And the pastures were green with the snow-capped mountains. I told you we got to skydive, and so when we skydived, you jump out of the plane, at 15,000 feet, and the guy told me that I was hooked to. He said, "Okay, when we get to the top of the mountains, we'll pull the cord." So we we free fell for like a minute, and coming down, and it's just, you as far as you could see, it looked like waves in the ocean with snow-capped mountains,
Wow.
just as far as you could see any direction. And then you see the alpine lakes, with the blue, and so I can't tell you enough about how beautiful the country is in New Zealand. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever been.
Well, that makes me, in addition to the beauty, that makes me think that this is going to be a somewhat tough up and down kind of hike. Talk about that. Is this something everyone could do, or is it really a pretty significant fitness level that you need to have to do this hike?
I would call it a moderate to difficult. Yeah,
Okay.
moderate to difficult. The first day climb we did, it was 2,600 feet elevation gain the
Okay.
first day, and that was over about, I want to say, about 9 miles.
Okay.
You hike along the lake for about 3 miles, is what we did, and then you start your climb, and it's a pretty steady climb up. And we had some of our students struggling with that, and I mean, it was a tough climb with backpacks. I would, I always compare things to hiking out of the Grand Canyon. It's not like hiking out of the Grand Canyon,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
it's not that hard. But you did have switchbacks through there, and of course the scenery was beautiful. You had to go through these lush forests, and then you get up to the mountaintops where it starts clearing out, and you can start seeing snow-covered mountains. And so it was a tough climb, but not. I'm trying to think of a hike that would be similar to that, but 2,600 feet elevation gain gives you a good idea of what
Yeah.
it is over about 9 miles. So
How crowded is the trail? I know you were there just before the Great Walk season officially started, but were the huts pretty crowded? Were there a lot of people on the trail already, or was this pretty easy to deal with that way?
we saw a few people. The Luxmore wasn't that crowded. Now the second hut we went to on the second night was more crowded, and so it was all. I would say it was almost at capacity. We were almost full there, but it was a smaller hut, and we met a few people hiking along the trail, but not many. And I don't think we met anybody going counterclockwise. I think, now that I think about that, I think everybody was going clockwise because we didn't pass anybody coming towards us, and so I guess that's pretty standard for that trail. Yeah, so it was not crowded at all. I don't know that we passed anybody the first day that was not in our group.
So one thing I know nothing about in New Zealand are the plants and animals.
Uh huh.
Did you see any animals out there? If so, what kind of animals are there, and what's the foliage like? Are there trees? Are you sort of above tree line, or are there something like that as well?
There are lots of trees and a very lush area, lots
Okay.
of moisture. So New Zealand is known for their ferns. And so you go through these forests that have moss hanging down from the trees, like you might see in Mobile or something like that. And then there's ferns covering the ground almost everywhere you
Oh
see.
wow.
It's just yeah, the very mature forests there that are covered with moss and ferns and very wet area. The plant life is a lot of ferns. That's their women's rugby team are the Silver Ferns.
Ah,
So
okay.
ferns is a national symbol of New Zealand. The animal life, that's very interesting. So you have the Kia. The Kia is a alpine parrot that is pretty large bird. They were found. We saw them throughout the track that we did. There's one that was hanging out next to Luxmore Hut when we got there. Of course, we were fascinated with it. It was up by the picnic table, and they are a lot like our ravens out in the West, so they're very opportunistic birds,
Uh-huh.
very intelligent. They can get into your backpack or other gear quickly. And so we observed and, hung out next to the Kia, and very beautiful green bird, it's got the pointed beak there that could do some damage. I mean, we heard stories of Kias even causing flat tires
Oh,
by
wow.
puncturing a tire. That tells you how strong they are. We saw them there at Luxmore Hut. Then we were hiking from Luxmore to the next hut on the second day, and we stopped at this forest burn emergency shelter up on the mountain pass. It's kind of up in a saddle there, and they had vault toilets and things like that. So my wife was going to going to use the bathroom there, and she left me the backpack and said, "Okay, make sure the kids don't get in this." But she put her trekking poles down outside of the the toilet, and had 7 Kias flew in, and they started going after her trekking pose,
Wow.
which they're very curious, and just they'll get into almost anything. So then we were coming down from there towards the Iris Burn hut. We were coming down the trail, and we had a Kia in front of us that just kind of hopped along in front of us for probably 100 yards. And just I'd say they're very social birds, but could also
Yeah.
be very destructive. So you need to be careful with them, just like you would a raven if you're
Okay.
out west. And then they have these. They have something called stoats, which were introduced into New Zealand. They're an invasive species, and they're kind of a weasel-like animal,
Mm-hmm.
and they are a major threat to the bird population. And so throughout the Kepler track, there we probably saw 100 boxes trying to catch stoats.
Oh,
And
wow.
so this is something that New Zealand has an interesting history because it really had no mammals. It was all birds. So there were no mammals at all until Europeans came in and brought mammals
Mm-hmm.
with them. And so, of course, some of those mammals have caused a lot of damage. That is one of them. So they're trying to fight against that. And so those are the two main, as far as animal life goes, that we noticed. There were birds all over the place that were beautiful, singing as you go through those forests. Yeah, just that was another part that I remember walking through the last day through this about 14-mile stretch that we were going, and through most of it, you had the birds just singing and flying around all over in the forest area.
So, how long of a hike is this in distance and in days? And give me the days that you think makes the most sense, and then whether that's different from what you guys ended up doing.
The distance of the hike is 60K or 37 miles. Our distance that we did was 31.5 miles. And we decided from the beginning that we wouldn't do the whole loop because one section is just hiking along the lake, which we were going
Okay.
to do our first 3 miles of that. So we thought, okay, we'll have this bridge to get picked up at from the very beginning. That's what we decided. We did our tramp in 3 days and 2 nights. The original plan was to do 4 days and 3 nights. The last day, well, first day we did
Mm-hmm.
8.6 miles, 2,600 elevation gain. Second day was 9.1 miles with 1,600 elevation gain and 2,400 loss. It was a big down. I mean, you coming
Mm-hmm.
down off those ridges, it tore your legs up at the end of that day. So that was the one day that I really felt fatigued at the end. And then day 3, we did 14 miles, and it was just a gradual descent on a very smooth track. And so it was easy to make really good time on that. We were knocking out easy 20-minute miles as we were going through that section. Depending on how much time that you want and how aggressive you want to be as far as hiking it, 14 miles sounds like a long ways, in that last day, but it was actually our easiest day. And we had planned to stay at a hut about 11 miles in there. We actually stopped there and waited for all of our group to catch up and get there. And then we talked to everybody and said, "Do you guys want to leave now, or do you want to stay another night?" And it was unanimous that they wanted to go. So we had another 3 miles to get to the bridge. So we had gone 11 miles and walked a little bit farther.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, you could do it 2 nights. If you're a strong backpacker, you could do that easily in 2 nights without much difficulty. But if you want to take your time and spend more time, then 4 nights makes sense, and just enjoy the area a little bit more.
So, what were the huts that you stayed at, and are there any others that you saw that you might consider that others should consider staying at?
Okay, we stayed at Luxmore Hut, which is up high on the mountains, and it's right below Luxmore Peak, and Luxmore Cave is near that. And it was the biggest of the huts that we stayed in, and it's what you would consider an alpine lodge. I mean, it was really nice, and so definitely I would stay in that one if I was going to stay in one. Iris Burns was at the bottom of the second day of the climb. We came down to it. It was a smaller hut, probably slept 40 or so, and had a smaller kitchen area and everything, but had a big open area outside, and they had vault toilets outside. That was a nice hut. We ran into black flies there, which was
Oh, okay.
a painful experience. So didn't really know because there was a beautiful river that goes right next to it. So we were out hanging out by the river, soaking our feet in the cold water and that sort of thing. And noticed that there were black flies around, and we were getting bit, but we didn't understand that those bites last for like a week afterwards. And
Oh,
so,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's kind of like in the South we have chiggers,
Uh
and
huh.
so they bite you and they itch, but then they itch for another week after that. And that's what these black fly bites were like. And then we were going to stay at the Matura. I'm probably not pronouncing that very well, but Matura was a another hut there that was about 11 miles from the Iris Burn hut. And then there's another hut just beyond that. I don't remember the name of it, but it was real close to the other one. And we were going to stay at the Motora. It's right on the lake. It has actually a beachfront on the lake there. It's
Oh,
a
wow.
smaller one. I would say probably sleep maybe 40, but we stayed there just the afternoon and then hiked the last 3 miles to leave that last day.
You mentioned that Luxmore has a cave near there. Is that something worth doing as a side trip?
We went out to it. It's probably about a 10-minute walk out from the hut. We went out to it. And it has actually stairs that goes down into the cave where you can enter there. And I crawled back about as far as I felt comfortable with without having caving gear, anything like that. And it looks like you could go back into it farther, but it was an interesting sight to see there close to Luxmore Hut. So it's worth a side trip out there to look at it.
And anything else in the area of Te Anu to check out while you're out there?
You've got the waterfall that's next to the Iris. Let's see, the Iris Burn hut.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not far from there. Kim and I didn't go. The students went. A lot of the students went out there to check it out and said it was a cool waterfall. That one's worthwhile. You've got the river that goes right down through that last day we hiked, and be a lot of places to explore there. A couple things around Teanu that you don't want to miss is the Milford Sound. Milford Sound is a beautiful place not far from there, and it gets a lot of snow, and so they open in certain times. It had just opened when we got through there, and we got to do an overnight boat trip out on the Milford Sound. It takes you all the way out, and you go out into the open sea and turn back and come back around. We did kayaking the first day, but it was so foggy and rainy. We were out kayaking in the rain, and so we couldn't see much. And so the next day, the sun came out, and so the waterfalls coming down Milford Sound are just incredible. I mean,
Wow.
beautiful places. The boat captain would take the boat right into the waterfall, and the students were out on the deck, and they just got drenched. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's a beautiful place. A lot of seals and other sea life that you can see out there, and tall, straight up mountains on each side of that sound. It's well worth checking out, and I would recommend doing a tour there. If you could get an overnight tour or something, that would be great. There's also in Teanu and the lake there a glowworm cave tour that we checked out. It looked very interesting. I recommended for the student group going the next year that they might do that the night before they do their hike. And so I don't know if any of them did it or not, but that looked like an interesting thing too. So that would be these effervescent worms, that were there that lit up the cave.
Okay. That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah,
If you were to do this hike again, is there anything you would do differently?
I think the only thing we would do differently is hopefully have more equipment with us of our own, so because a water filter we took was a Grail, kind of a press water filter that was a lot heavier than I would normally take, so
Hmm.
if we had better water filters and our trekking poles with us, we got trekking poles, but you like to have your own gear,
Hmm.
so that would have been better. But the one thing I would do differently is bring insect repellent. So that one day, I mean, we all got eaten up by those black flies, and we paid the price for the week after. And so I would take insect repellent for the low lying areas.
So if you're someone going to New Zealand and you like to hike or to tramp, as they would say,
Uh-huh.
why do the Kepler Track versus the other opportunities available in New Zealand?
That's a good question because there's some beautiful tracks. The Milford Track is one of the most famous ones, and we checked into that. And if I went back, I'd probably try to do that one.
Hmm.
But the Kepler Track, good thing about it is you get a little bit of everything about New Zealand. It is just so quintessential New Zealand with the ferns, the snow-covered mountains, the long ridges where you're walking with alpine lakes around. It puts all the beauty of New Zealand in one place. That's what I liked about the Kepler Track, and the Kepler Track is very popular. It's one of the more popular tracks I would say in New Zealand.
Is there a particular moment or memory that stands out for you?
Yes, probably the best memory of the trip was the second day. So we stayed at Luxmore Hut that night, got up the next morning, started climbing up towards Luxmore Peak. After you get to Luxmore Peak, you walk on top of ridge lines for, I would say, 5, 6 miles, something like that. And I mean, it is something out of the Lord of the Rings. As far
Hmm.
as you can see, you've got snow-capped mountains, you've got alpine lakes, and there's snow all around you. It's some snow on the trail that you're walking through, but it's just if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, that you are in heaven there because it is just so beautiful. So we were walking through that, and we were catching up with students occasionally, or they were passing us, and so I ran into two of our students, and one of them was Abby. There, Abby's just this wonderful girl, just a great human being that loves life, and she loves nature and plants and things like that. And so I saw Abby, and we started taking pictures, and so Abby got on top of this rock overlooking this alpine lake with snow covered mountains behind her, with the green forest below her. And she got up there with her hands lifted above her head, and I snapped this picture of her. It's probably my favorite photo I've ever taken. And it just showed her joy of being out there, and what I was experiencing too. She expressed it through that photo. I sent you a copy of that just to show you how incredible it was.
I'm looking at it right now. It's a fantastic shot.
It was such an awesome picture. She's was just enjoying God's creation out there on that beautiful day. And we later the next day, Abby was in front of us, and we caught up with her, and she was sitting on the rock in the middle of the in middle of the fern forest, and just meditating there and just
Nice.
soaking it in.
Uh
And that's
huh.
just I've never been one to be able to meditate very much. ADD, my mind just runs. And so being able to sit and just take that in like she did, I just love that for her, that experience for her.
Well, JD, thank you for telling me about your trek on the Kepler track. But while I've got you, I've got a few more questions if you don't mind.
Okay, great.
So, what's one hike or trip that you've done besides this one that others shouldn't miss out on?
Oh, let's see. I would say probably the Escalante route in the Grand Canyon. I love the Grand Canyon. That we're in the process of trying to move out to the area just so we can be close, and just got finished with the backpacking trip in the Grand Canyon this past week. The Escalante route goes down Tanner Trail over in the eastern part close to Desert View, and goes down to the river about 8, 9 miles down to the river, and then you go on the Tonto, which runs along the river, just above the river, for about I want to say 12 miles or so. And it is the most beautiful place. You're just walking along, looking down at the Colorado River over towards the North Rim with the South Rim rising above you, and make your way down to Hance Rapids. And from Hance Rapids, we went up through Grandview and came up Grandview, spent the night on Horseshoe Mesa. And we did that on a 4 day, 3 night trip. And wish we would have added an extra night because it was such a beautiful experience. Yeah, that's one I would say for a backpacking trip. For a day hike, I think our favorite day hike we've ever done was in Glacier National Park. We did the Highline Trail, and the Highline Trail we actually took the shuttles up to Logan Pass, and it took us half a day to get up there. I was so frustrated by the time we got up there because we could have driven, a lot easier. So I guess they're still working on their shuttle service there.
Uh-huh.
They don't have it down like Zion or Grand Canyon, but so they're still working on that. So we got up there about noon, and I told Kim, I said, we can walk down faster than we can hike. And we didn't really know about the Highline Trail there, so we started looking around for trails, and we got on the Highline Trail, came down 12 miles above the going to the Sun Road, and it was just beautiful. First part of July, they just opened it, not long before that. Wildlife and the glacier snow and the wildflowers. It was a beautiful experience, and so yeah, I would highly recommend that for a day hike.
All right. So I'm excited about both of these that you just told me about because you may have known from one of my episodes that my wife and I did the just down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and back up.
Yeah.
But the Escalante route sounds great. And that plateau, the Tonto Plateau area is just beautiful. So
Yes.
I would love to do a longer trip in the Grand Canyon. That sounds like a great opportunity to
Yeah.
do that. And then the High Line, my wife and I, when our kids were young, we went to Glacier and we went up to Logan Pass, but they were too young to do something significant like that. But I think people backpack the High Line as well. So I'm not sure on that, but I think
Yeah, I
people
would
do.
assume they could. There is a chateau up there that you hike into, which we
Uh-huh.
were like, okay, we got to come back here sometime. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so many things you discover like that you do. This past week, we just did in the Grand Canyon off the North Rim on the west side. We did the Thunder River, Tapeats Creek, and Deer Creek Loop.
Oh, okay.
It was probably the most challenging route we'd done in the Grand Canyon. A lot rougher on the north side than it is on the south side if
Uh-huh.
you're off the corridor trails. So there were some pretty intense climbs and other things you had to navigate there, but beautiful. Thunder River. I don't know if you went. I don't know if you did rim to rim when you did your trip.
No. Uh-uh.
Okay. Well, you go past Roaring Springs, which is a landmark where the water supply for the north and south rim right now, and Roaring Springs just pours out of the side of the bluff, and
Oh,
it's
wow.
out of a cave there. And I've always been impressed with that. But Thunder River is about twice the size of Roaring Springs, and so you just have this. It's a half-mile river that flows out of the side of the mountain
Huh.
and goes down, cascading down to Tapeats Creek, and it's beautiful. And then Deer Creek cuts through this channel in Grand Canyon farther down. Then it drops about 200 feet from a waterfall down right next to the river. And so, just so many places to explore in Grand Canyon. I'm still trying to get those marked off my list as as we go through. So, hopefully want to do the Beamer Trail to the Little Colorado River confluence, and then Clear Creek this winter. Those are two on our list.
You're making retirement sound pretty darn good.
I told everybody that I wanted to become a full time hiker when I retired. So I'm working towards that.
Awesome. So, what's the next trip on your list?
Uh, Next trip, when we talked before, I told you we were doing we did a 1 day rim to rim. This summer we had done a 4 day rim to rim where we camped 3 nights backpacking across, and then we did a 3 day with 2 nights backpacking and camping across there. And then we had friends that wanted to do a 1 day rim to rim, so we're like, okay, we need to do a 1 day rim to rim.
That sounds awful, by the way.
it actually was pretty awful. No, it wasn't that bad. So what we had trained all summer, just hiking in Grand Canyon. We probably did 400 miles of hikes around either on the rim or below the rim this summer. And so we also did the Arizona Trail from the North Rim to the Utah border, which about 70 miles or so.
Uh-huh.
And so that last section we did, or last two sections of that, we did 28 miles in one day just to see if we could stay on our feet for 12 hours. And so we made it through that. And so we were just waiting for the opportune time to do the 1 day rim to rim. And of course, it was so warm this fall that it took a long time to find the days. And finally, we found the perfect day. And it was probably in the 60s in the inner canyon, which is, great. And so we did about a 12-hour crossing for rim to rim, and we had done the north rim. So we did Bright Angel up to North Kaibab, which is, most people will go South Kaibab,
Mm-hmm.
but just for logistics, it's easier to start on the Bright Angel Trail because
Mm-hmm.
lots of parking there. You can walk to the trailhead, and then when we got to the North Kaibab trailhead, we could just walk to our camper, which is about a half mile away there. So convenient to be able to staying there. So yeah, so that was on our list. So I think the two coming up with the Clear Creek, down in the bottom above Phantom Ranch,
Okay.
that's one that we've always wanted to do. And then the Beamer Trail, which takes you down Tanner and over to the confluence of the Little Colorado River where it comes in. You've probably seen pictures of the blue water coming in,
Mm-hmm.
mixing with the Colorado. Yeah, beautiful place. If I could have everything perfect, I would do the Salt Trail off of the Navajo Reservation and come down and then connect into the Beamer and go all the way up Tanner that way. That would be my ideal trip.
Well, that sounds like you've got a lot to do in the Grand Canyon region still. So that's awesome.
Yeah, lots of trails left.
Last question. What's the most valuable thing that backpacking has taught you?
Well, one thing I always say, and we did this hard backpacking trip, last week. We hiked out from Deer Creek and came out, and it was about 5,000 feet elevation gain over about 9 miles, and there's three big climbs coming out, bouldering and stuff like that. And I get to the top, and I get this euphoria that I don't feel in any other area of my life. And I always say that I never feel more alive than after a challenging backpacking trip. That I just, it gives me something that I can't explain, that this euphoria comes over me. And I don't get it anywhere else in life. That it's the realization that, as a person, you can carry everything that you need to survive, not only survive, but to thrive in life on your back. You've
Yeah.
got all your
Yeah.
food, you got your place to sleep, filter way to filter water. That's all you need. And
Yeah.
you can get out in this beautiful these beautiful national parks we have, other wilderness areas that we have, and just get out there and just absorb, the nature, God's creation, and whatever you want to call that. That that you are a part of that. And so that's what I really love. I've been thinking a lot since I've been at Grand Canyon, trying to put into words what I feel when I'm at the Grand Canyon. And so I've kind of figured it out now, where you have a great artist who's painting a portrait. You see the brush strokes, or you have the statue of David that Michelangelo carved, and he hammered with his chisel on there, and you hear ding, ding, ding with the chisel. And of course, the Grand Canyon, the creator made it out of erosion with water. And so I was there this past week, sitting on a rock in the middle of the Tapeats Creek with the water just flowing down, and I was like, creation hasn't ended. It's
Right. It's
it's
still
it's
happening.
continuing. Yeah, it's continuing this moment.
Yes.
And if you could lay the statue of David on its side and make it 230 miles long and 15 miles wide and a mile deep, I get to walk through those crevices that the creator chiseled through that landscape. And it's like, wow, this is incredible. And so just that the spiritual side that it gives you, just being connected with creation and with nature. We got to live on the Navajo reservation for 6 months back in 2017, and I got to know a lot of indigenous people, and they have such a deeper understanding of the spiritual side of things than we do, or and I do as a European American, German American, and so understanding that we had a elder from the Havasupai that came in, and he was doing a 6-day prayer walk to these spiritual sites in the Grand Canyon. He told us what the meaning of that was, and it was so much deeper than anything I could grasp. Just because his people have been in the Grand Canyon through time immortal. It's just they've been here forever, and and they're kind of known as the keepers of the Grand Canyon. So getting to experience that is just incredible. And everybody, Grand Canyon is my place. Other people have their place. A lot of my friends from California, the Sierras are the place, or
Yep. Yep.
Yosemite, or back in Arkansas, we have the Buffalo River, the first national river, and I have friends that just love that place. And so, being in those places where you can just feel nature and be a part of that world is incredible.
There's so much I want to say in response to what you just said, but I don't think I can improve on it, and I'll just be babbling. So I'm not going to say anything else. I think this is the perfect place to leave it. Thank you for coming on the show, JD Yingling.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate you letting me talk about the Kepler and other things with hiking.
Thanks again to JD Yingling for coming on the show and talking about the Kepler Track. And I hope that JD and I have inspired you to hike the Kepler Track. And if you've enjoyed this episode, tell a friend about it, or better yet, give us a good review on whichever podcast service you use. And keep in mind that this podcast is entertainment and meant to spark your interest. If you decide to hike the trail, do your own research. Like anything else worth doing, outdoor adventure has risk. So when you go, pack your common sense. And when you get back, tell me how it went. Next time on Trails Worth Hiking, we will go to another entirely new environment for the show and a new type of terrain. We'll be hiking almost 150 miles in a pretty remote environment where water is cached along the way for hikers. We'll be hiking through beautiful, open, rolling prairie grasslands of the United States and traversing the ups and downs of steep but shallow sedimentary canyons, or badlands, as they're known in this region. We'll also have to keep our eyes out for wild bison as we hike the Ma-Da-Hay Trail in the Badlands of North Dakota. If you have any questions or feedback on this episode, or ideas for future episodes, including if you want to be a guest and talk about a trail that you've hiked, reach out to me at trailsworthhiking@gmail.com. And I'll give you one more plug here at the end. Please do reach out to me as soon as possible if you'd like to come join me for a hike in Point Reyes National Seashore in March. I'd love to have you. I'd love to meet you and hope to see you there. So start planning your next hike, and before you know it, you'll be on the trail. Thanks for listening.